Okay, so here we are live with Paul Kenny, coming to us from New Zealand. I'm Dave Cunningham, based here at the Porter Shed as part of this Global Perspectives series of talks where we speak to entrepreneurs around the world, learn from their journey and get some insights from them as to their piece. So, Paul, where does this find you?
So I'm currently based in Auckland, which is a very big change from the time I spent in Dubai, but I'm thoroughly enjoying adjusting to seasons. So I've been used to 13 years of just very hot weather, and it's nice to actually finally have rain again.
Oh, great. It's fairly good. But for those just joining now, and I see the numbers ramping up as we speak, you grew up in Galway here. I know you probably from when you were getting mad into golf, and I had a golf shop, and I was a couple of years older than you. I probably think it's two, but it's probably more like 6 or 8 or something like that. But I remember, I think you might have done some transition your work experience in the golf shop. I know we used to play a little bit of golf together, and
Yeah,
and
I used
then
to never win. Used to always take my money. I'm just going to say that in record.
oh really? But I used to give you the opportunity to watch me play, right?
Oh, of course, and
That was
caddy for you. No, but I do remember that time when I caddied for you in Lahinch. I can't remember what tournament it was, but that was a great experience that day. I really enjoyed that.
I still owe you for that, right?
No,
Yeah.
I remember you gifted me the Tiger Woods red Nike golf hat, which I actually remember vividly. I was very
Oh,
happy with that. Yeah.
very good, very good. Well, that's cool. Well, we had a lot of fun back then, and I've known and followed the journey as many of us have from Galway as you moved to Dubai, started various ventures in that. Just on your background, I know some of your family are joining from Galway here. Kenny's Bookshop is something that we know about, and I know. Your grandfather, Des, was actually a mentor of my own dad, Jim, and our families are very much connected in that regard. But one thing that I didn't mention that I would say on the call is there's a guy called Tom Kenny, which I'm holding here,
Yeah.
who's your great grandfather. Now, the Porter Shed, which I sit in, we're moving from here to the Connacht Tribune.
Oh,
And
cool. Okay.
so we're taking that building, renovating it. And your great grandfather was the founder of the Connacht Tribune. So he was, and he was a famous writer. So he was. So there's big connections here. He was also a guy who was president of the Irish Tourist Association, and then his son and went on to found Kenny's along with Maureen, his wife, and made a global business out of that. So your connections to Galway are deep, and to the Porter Shed here too.
Yeah, and I spent 22 years of my life growing up in Galway, and I absolutely loved growing up there. For how small it was, but how connected it was. And what I really appreciated is you don't appreciate what you have until you go.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm out of Galway or Ireland for I think coming up to 14 years. And so it's a long time. So my perspective in Ireland is probably still the perspective I had when I was 22. So still in college, but there's so many things to do with Ireland that I really appreciate when I go back. So I'm that person when I show up that I'm taking pictures up and down Shop Street. While when I was 21, 22, I would have been ashamed to take out my phone and take pictures. But yeah, I mean, the community feeling, that's something that I really appreciate now. And I'm in New Zealand now, but the being close to family, being close to friends, all of that. And that's something that was very different when I moved to the Middle East, because that didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So there's huge parts of Ireland that I really, really, really appreciate. And, a lot of the success that I've had is also down to the entrepreneurs I was surrounded by, which are all family members, be it my parents, uncles, aunts, my grandparents. And it's funny, when you're in the moment, you don't realize it, but when you're out of the moment, you realize how much that shaped you.
That's really nice. And you've kept in touch here, though you've only been back a little over a dozen times, I think, in those 14 odd years. We'd always meet up here whenever you're back. we've met in Dubai quite a few times with the various ventures that you were doing, and you've also helped out with Enterprise Ireland in the Middle East as well. I know they would pull you into things over there to help entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out how to break into that market. But for you, I mean, you went age 22, joined the Emirates Group to do some work there. And how soon was it after that you founded what was Cobone at the time?
So I was doing a master's in NUIG. And I was doing, I think it was one of the first or second cohorts doing the master's in e-commerce. And I'm not sure if it's called that now, but and it was a 2-year master's. And the first year was theory based, and the second year was work experience and a dissertation. And, you know, I really enjoyed the master's much more than I did the undergrad, because it was much more specialized and practical, while the undergrad was primarily theory. And I was in the second year of the master's, and I just realized I had this itch where I wanted to just do something else. And that itch was to get out of Ireland and just kind of explore. And my first job was, the first job, I tried to get a job outside of Ireland, and I was trying anywhere. And my first job I was offered was a secondary school student in Dubai teaching business, which I didn't accept, thankfully, because I don't know what that would have ended up doing. Yeah. And I ended up accepting a job with Jumeirah Group, the hotel chain. And I was earning 3,500 dirham, which is about $1,000 US, which in Dubai terms isn't really that much money. But I went primarily
a week,
a month.
A month.
Yeah, per month. Yeah, so 12 grand a year. And I primarily went there for the opportunity, and you know, it was the best decision I ever took, because I got placed as an intern in the global marketing department, and they had these beautiful assets like Burj Al Arab, Emirates Towers, Jumeirah Beach Hotel. And I was able to see, you know, how a big brand would conceptualize products and then roll it out and market it. So that was a great experience. So that was the first job I had. And I arrived in Dubai November 1st, 2007. So that feels like a lifetime ago now.
And the e-commerce, while it was really growing globally, it was really quite nascent then for the Middle East, and the usage of credit cards also was something that was very low. It was a real cash society. And tell us a little bit about you know, we won't spend too much time on it, but just to give a bit of context on how you decided to launch what was a very successful venture.
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting. It was a lot of the things that I grew up with my family was, you know, they were all self-employed. And at the time when I was working with my father or my uncles, aunts and grandparents, you know, the term entrepreneur didn't exist. You know, that's kind of like a modern term to make it look good. But, you know, they were self-employed, which wasn't an easy thing to do, because, you know, you're in an environment where there was very high interest rates. You know, financing from the banks wasn't readily available, and you were pretty much surviving month on month. And now it's become this modern term where they look at people who've exited their companies or put their companies public, and it's a very different play. And the play of online started with, you know, in the family business, where they actually were one of the first bookshops to ever go online. And I got that initial kind of exposure to that, which it really interested me. And then when I moved to Dubai, I had this realization. I spent 18 months with my first company, which was Jumeirah. I resigned in the global financial crisis when everyone was holding onto their jobs. I said, I can no longer earn $1,000 a month. I need to go and try and make some more money. And then I went to a media company, and I was doing their online marketing, and I just really struggled with having a boss. And then I went to Emirates, and I was like, wow, great opportunity, globally heading their SEO and SEM. And I just hated it. I hated every second of it, but I didn't know why. And in hindsight, it was linked to actually having to report to someone. So I just realized enough is enough. And at the age of 25, I said, let me start my own business. And I saw what was happening in Groupon in the US, that they were scaling really quickly. And it was the perfect business, I thought, in the Middle East, because the Middle East had this challenge whereby there is no physical addresses in the Middle East. So in Ireland, it's very normal that I can actually drop a letter at your house and put it in the post box. While in the Middle East, if you want to do physical delivery of a product, you actually have to drop it to where that person is standing at that moment in time, which sounds really silly, but that's the reality of it. So I said, look, a digital business where you virtually deliver the product, which was a coupon via email, was a really smart approach.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Middle East is still today a heavily cash dominant society. So that means if you're an e-commerce company, 80 to 90% of your revenue actually is done cash on delivery, which means you will physically bring that product to someone's hands and collect the cash. So you imagine the logistics nightmare of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I launched Cobone in August 2010, and we grew it to $33 million in revenue after 2 years. But what was interesting is 80% of that business was printing out coupons in 6 countries, these pieces
Mm-hmm.
of paper, putting them on a motorbike, driving it to where that person is and picking up the cash. So we were moving, millions of dollars per month of physical cash in 6 currencies back
You're
and
like
forth between the office. Yeah.
you'd
It
be
was
like
a
a money
unique
laundering.
challenge.
You'd be a serious money laundering target around here to say, what's he doing with all that cash?
But in the Middle East, that's how so that's Amazon just acquired a big company in the Middle East called Souq.com a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And their business was all cash and delivery.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is because of COVID, that whole thing with cash has now become less of a requirement. So people are now moving to debit card and credit card.
Interesting. But so you found a way to get the distribution and built up that massive channel, and then collecting the payments all from scratch. And then at what point did somebody approach you, or how did the process go when you were approached to be acquired?
So that process was predetermined by the team. So we actually started the process with an investment bank to try and do an exit. And there was a number of macro decisions linked to that. So one, we were in an industry where we were benchmarked against a company that had gone public. And that company was getting an awful lot of flack because of the way they actually ran their books. And then there was unique challenges happening in the Middle East at the time. So, and there tends to be constant challenges in the Middle East from a macroeconomic perspective. But I think the decision was, while we're on a heavy growth curve, let's look towards an exit.
And in the end, that came, what year was that? Or you were
2013,
like
I think. Yeah, 27, 28,
yeah,
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So that was,
and that was a blur. I mean,
really?
We went through the Arab Spring. So we were operations in 6 countries. So the UAE and Dubai was our headquarter, but we had operations in Egypt, Lebanon, Bahrain, Saudi. I'm going to forget Bahrain. And I remember the time the Arab Spring started in Egypt, our office was just off Tahrir Square in Cairo. And I remember looking at the BBC. So in our office, we had about 70 people in our Dubai office. And I just remember looking at the BBC and I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening live. And all our staff, we had 30 staff in Cairo at the time. And, there's so many situations in that 2.5 years where I ran that business, because we were growing so fast, you almost didn't have time in the moment to resonate with what was happening, that were absolutely surreal, like almost like a movie, if you had to look at it back. It just didn't make any sense. I mean, from delivering the coupons via motorbikes to the Arab Spring and the impact that had on the culture in the region, to, for example, my wife and I, hotel being bombed, to, there's endless stories of craziness, which in hindsight, I'm glad I'm standing. So.
My God, it's phenomenal. And was there a moment during that time, it all happened so fast, like was it where you realized this is really, really taking off, this is going to be something really significant, don't mess it up,
Yeah.
or let's get the most out of this? When did it hit you that, or did you have time to pause and realize what was going on?
I think the only time I've had time to pause was in the last year and a half, I think, I'll be honest. I think when I went to Dubai, went there with the right premise of, let's go and learn. And then the global financial crash changed everything, because in the UAE, for example, so in Ireland, if you lose your job today, you can still go home and you can still sit in your house and you won't be kicked out of the country. But in the UAE, you lose your job, you have to leave, because there's a sponsorship system and a residency program. And add to that, there's no bankruptcy protection. So there's a lot of protection when you're in a developed economy, you know, if stuff goes wrong, while in the Middle East, there's zero protection, nothing. So I think of the last 13 years that I was in Dubai, it was a lot to do with survival, not in the negative aspect, but you're running a fine line where things that are black are actually white and things that are white are actually black, and you're operating in the gray all the time. So that builds a unique way of having to execute a business and operate. And I don't think I actually had time to sit back, I'll be honest, and really think it through.
Well, I think anytime we would meet for coffee or whatever in Dubai, down around the marina where your office was, you know, it was relentless. There would be one of the biggest names in consumer packaged goods might be coming in to get advice on how to do things, or you'd be doing things with Visa or whatever. It was just insane, the throughput and the productivity coming out of there. But you moved, I suppose, talk about selecting the best country in the world to move to ahead of a pandemic.
I know. So lucky.
You moved just ahead of
a few months before.
And
I'm super happy to be here. I mean, I think in a way Ireland is very similar to New Zealand. You know, one, it has 4 seasons, which I really appreciate now. The other parts, it's great to raise a family, and and I think the bit that if anyone's been to Dubai may resonate with, it's authentic to be here, while when you're in the Middle East, it's not. Everything has been artificially created in the last decade. And that leads to a certain, type of people to operate there. And, a couple of the questions you're asked in Dubai quite early in a conversation with anyone is, how long have you been here? And you could say 99% of people is sub 2 years, right? Because not many people survive how cutthroat it is there. And then, I would tell people I'm here 10, 11 years, 13 years. They're like, how did you last this long? So, it's really nice to be in New Zealand now, and super fortunate. I mean, because in a way, New Zealand has, the way the government, they've managed it really well here, and we've had a completely normal life. Schools have been open, every business is open, no mask wearing. And there's no urgency on vaccine rollout because there is no COVID.
Wow, incredible. The delving into kind of some of the business things, and we want to get to questions, of course, that will come in, and just lessons learned from your time in doing this. But just briefly on that, you went from what some might say is one of the most corrupt countries in the world to probably the one that is ranked as the least corrupt. And you've operated, I know, in numerous countries and continue to. But how have you found the transition to that type of economy? Not that I'm saying that you were corrupt and that's why you're successful in Dubai. I'm not alleging that in any way, shape, or form. But how's the transition been in terms of the business culture?
Yeah, I mean, for those that don't know, like the Middle East is it's a monopoly, right? So one individual will own the entire everything from, although there's competition, there's no competition. So, and you're operating in an environment where you have to be conscious that you're constantly competing with that individual, and that's the ruler. So very quickly that you may have a great business idea, but you can't do it because of going against what that individual owns. So, and then coming to a country where there is, Bloomberg had an article where it was just when I arrived in New Zealand shortly after, and it stated the least corrupt countries in the world to the most, and New Zealand is the least. And it's beautiful to be in a country where there's so much transparency and accountability and openness, with the good or bad, and I see a lot that's happening in Ireland at the moment. And, I think culturally New Zealand is similar to Ireland, is that you would go to a restaurant in Ireland and you'd have a crap meal and the waiter or waitress would come up to you and say, "How was your meal?" You'd be like, "Oh, that's great. It was beautiful. Can't wait to come back again." And then you leave the restaurant and say, "That was the shittest meal I've ever had in my whole life." And you'll tell everyone about it. But I think there's an interesting undercurrent happening in Ireland now. And I think Ireland's going to go through quite a massive change, in my feeling, to how the government are running things at the moment. And that's quite exciting to see from the outside.
Yeah, let's maybe we'll jump into that a little bit more, but I promised I wouldn't ask inflammatory questions that would be quoted too much. But in terms of the business kind of trajectory, then after Cobone, that exit, you know, apart from all the covers and the in business magazines and Forbes 30 under 30 lists back when there wasn't 5,000 people in the 30 under 30 list, you got involved in various entities. You know, there was a large retail organization. Do you want to touch on a couple of those things? And I suppose maybe I know you invested in Go Super Awesome as well, which is an incredible company that was sold to Epic Games recently, right in there early with Dylan the whole way. Talk to us about how you decide to get involved in various businesses. So like what goes through your head? What's the process before you decide to delve in?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have a scientific approach to how because oftentimes if you research the idea too much, you'll find a reason not to do it. I find primarily based on the experience I've had is that you can link things quite quickly and see an opportunity. And then the key bit for me is to find people to do it with you that move at the same pace as you, that have the same energy as you. And, you know, in the, say, 13 or 14 years I've been operating, I've realized that by putting an energy out there, and this sounds like hocus pocus or whatever, but it actually does work. And you'd be surprised how much, if you put energy towards something, how that returns to you quite quickly. And, you know, a lot of things, the second business I did was an online travel agency. And we raised $5 million for that. And it was on the same premise that the Middle East was a cash-based economy and that we could actually execute it by delivering the travel packages to people's doors. You know, it sounds so archaic, but that was actually the business concept. And we grew the business within a year to about $1 million per month in turnover, but I couldn't get the unit economics to work. I would have had to go out and raise another 20 million to potentially even get to profitability. And I didn't want to be in such a minority of an equity space. So I decided to liquidate that. And that was a whole nother experience because there's no bankruptcy protection in the Middle East. But I think it's that from an opportunity perspective is opportunities will always be there. The difference between an opportunity is whether you act on it. And when I see opportunities that I think could be interesting, I act with absolute intent. I go after it with as much as I can, be it capital, team, resource. And I try and make it the best possible outcome. Like go in with 100% ambition to make it work, whatever that might be. And oftentimes it fails. And a couple of business partners, you know, I work with today would resonate with that, is that we try so many things and so many things don't work, and people talk about it, but trying so many things and being all in is very different. And you got to be all in, you got to be fully focused to make it work. And, you know, out of the 3 or 4 that you try, one will work, and then suddenly you get traction. And
you know, I see a question from Joe Haslam there, lecturer in Madrid Business School, who he's wondering about your thoughts about how COVID will affect the Middle East. But just before that, to Joe's expertise on scaling companies, not many people that you know that I know, and we don't get to meet that many people who have actually gone through that hyper scaling kind of growth that you've done. And you brought one where you got the unit economics right, you were making money. Then you had one that you understood was busy and would be in most people's book $1 million revenue is pretty serious. And maybe today that might just be snapped up and bought already and it mightn't be liquidated because there's very few of those. But you have the ability, and you've executed on numerous times, of going from 0 to a significant number. You know, how did that happen, or how might we learn from that, or was it an ambitious thing or a process thing, or tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, it ultimately depends on, I look at that, it's the same effort to launch a coffee shop on the
Hmm.
corner of Shop Street as it is to do Starbucks globally. And
Hmm.
I don't know if that resonates with people, but the effort on picking a brand, figuring out your supply chain,
Hmm.
integrating your technology, hiring your first staff, doing the design of the shop, you can replicate that from one store to 100, but it's primarily linked to the intent going in, is that one, you'd want to play in an arena where there is an addressable market. I mean, it's quite a simple question. Is there a big enough addressable market that if your product doesn't work on the first variation, can you adjust it slightly to capture other people?
Hmm.
And sometimes you can go really, really narrow, and that just limits things. So I tend
Hmm.
to approach things with very, very wide net. And within that, then you begin to hone in and specialize through validation or A/B testing. Um,
Hmm.
but that's kind of my approach. And you know then it's also the people that you've around you. I think
Hmm.
if you know somebody told me, is like, you hang around with millionaires, you make thousands. You hang around with billionaires, you make millions. And it's being approached or surrounded by people who think on the scale of 100 million or a billion. And it's primarily a mindset difference. And I, I think it's quite challenging, because when I grew up in Galway, I used to think Shop Street was so long. I would walk Shop Street to the, bottom of Shop Street or Key Street all the way up to the top. And I was like, oh my God, this is the longest street ever. And then, you go to places like London or New York, and their high street is like 10 times longer.
Hmm.
So it's just the perspective on that,
Hmm.
things can be much bigger than what you think.
Hmm.
And I remember my definition of success when I was growing up in Galway was like, wow, I'd love to someday earn 100,000 euro.
Hmm.
100,000 euro, and I've completely made it, because that's a massive salary. And you would know the people that are actually earning that amount of money
Yeah.
in Galway at the time. And I think it's just what you define as possible. And if you set the ambition really high, you often set your own limitations to what's possible, or the
Mm.
culture defines what the limitations are.
And the people then that you choose in terms of who to go after that opportunity with, I mean, I think you've been through enough businesses now where you've probably made some good choices. There's probably been ones where you thought the team were right, and then it turns out they're not.
Lots of bad
It's,
choices, lots
mm,
of bad ones. Yeah, it's difficult.
yeah. And has that made you less willing? What are the learnings from that?
So I think the learning with working with a very broad spectrum of different nationalities, different
Mm.
religions, cultures, environments is to truly understand what that person's true agenda is.
Mm.
Everyone has a very different motive, and you'll never get it at face value what it is. And it's really important to get that motive aligned to what the business is or yours is quite early on, because you'll be surprised when businesses grow and money's been made that people's true motives come out.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it's difficult to really figure that out,
Mhm.
early stage and things. But I think that would be the big learning for me. So people are willing to learn, people willing to adapt, try and remove egos from the situation, because egos can just disrupt everything.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's complicated. It's quite complicated.
I remember speaking to you after I had a not so great experience, and you were like, "Tell me about it. I've been there before." In
Yeah,
terms of when startups go wrong, when greed comes in, when stuff like this, and I think both of us kind of realize that the people you do business with is everything, and understanding them at at a at that deeper level, it's something that we don't think about, because we think, okay, I'm a founder, I need a tech co-founder
yeah,
because
yeah,
I'm not good
yeah,
on
yeah.
that. You don't
And you're
think
desperate. You're
yeah,
desperate to jump into bed with
yeah,
anyone, right? But it'll be your biggest mistake.
yeah. Yeah, it's true. And you think, okay, so it's really, I thought that was really insightful in terms of trying to figure out what people's real real agenda is, or real value is. But then sometimes you're dealing with people and they haven't figured out their values or their agenda. They're just
Of
going
course.
along for the ride, and then they expose it. It's exposed later, which can be tricky. And tell us, so you spotted, let's say in spotting the likes of Dylan from Go Super Awesome and deciding to invest in that, what was it that attracted you to that, or made your decisions there?
If I look at Dylan as an entrepreneur, he's before Super Awesome, he'd done a number of ventures. Bunch had worked, a bunch hadn't, and I think in today's age, adaptability is a very powerful thing for anyone. So it's not that, because I did a daily deal business, I'll only ever do technology businesses because that's what I'm known for. No, I could go into anything. And Dylan's ability to constantly adapt and adjust was something that really attracted to me. And, he phoned me up and he said, "Hey, I'm going to start delivering toy samples to kids because the only way toys are being marketed now to kids is through TV. And I think I can disrupt that." So his first concept was called Box of Awesome, which was getting toy companies to pay to put their toys into the box and they would deliver it to kids. That's how he started. And I remember he phoned me up with the concept and I wired him £25,000 I was the first investor into the business. And where the concept ended up is exactly the opposite to what it started off as, right? And through his journey, he adapted the business so much. He acquired companies, rolled up assets, but he had that global ambition where it wasn't that it was for example, an Auckland business, I'll be the only coffee shop in Auckland or in Galway. It was, this is a global problem where every child could be targeted with this business. And he built an incredible business in a relatively quick time.
And it ended up as being a business that enable children to be protected as they surf the web and not be targeted on all, in terms of the surveillance capitalism that we're all exposed to, and
the market came to him then because Facebooks and all of those guys were being fined like crazy for what they did. And with Epic Games, I think the asset's going to go on to be an incredible asset for Epic.
Privacy apparently is going to be a thing. So talk about current ventures then, and just a quick question from Frank there in terms of, he was wondering, do you have failure built in as a possible outcome, and then just wipe it away if things doesn't really happen, doesn't bother you too much, or do you try to limit thoughts about the downside of things?
In my system is, you have to go into it not thinking about losing. There's no way this won't work, because when you're presenting that concept or idea to someone and you have self-doubt, they'll read that. People aren't stupid. They'll read off your energy. When entrepreneurs pitch you saying, "Oh, I got this idea, I'm going to run with it," and then say, "Oh, how's it progressing?" "Oh, I'm still working in this other company." That's failure baked in.
So you think the side hustle is something
unless you're transparent about it and you're saying it is a side hustle, but don't define it as your core business if it's not your business. If you're still, and I know there's a balance there, because you got to make it work, but there's a reality to, I just think to make something work, you got to be very, very, very focused on it, because it's the only way you'll validate it quick enough to either decide to pursue it or to stop it.
It's a challenging one, isn't it? Because those who can't afford to go all in, it limits them too. But in terms of the supports that are available, if there's enough work done in the background where you can get enough money just to sustain yourself, that's the first step. It doesn't have to be a 25 million raise at the start, right? And
no, things like EI are helping with that, from what I see. With grants and all of that. But I think is, if you can validate not your business, but that a metric within the potential business works, I think that is so powerful. And the sooner you can validate things, the better. And that's my learning, is just to try and validate some metric within your business that shows growth quite quickly.
And the kind of a line to that, have you seen in terms of, particularly, I mean, this is about a global perspective, ideally kind of talking to Ireland. I know you've got businesses, you've got a tech team in Pakistan, you've got a lot of work happening in Africa at the moment, which you can speak to if you wish. But some of the mistakes that you see people approach you and you give your time to kind of consider investing or advising, or that, you know, similar to that lack of commitment, what do you see, the mistakes we make as entrepreneurs that are just the common ones?
I think it's very, it's very easy to say criticize an entrepreneur. And in New Zealand, they have a thing called tall poppy syndrome. And I think it's very similar in Ireland, from what I understand. I don't know if it's changed a lot, is that there's a peer pressure to conform. And if you don't conform, you're weird, or, you're not allowed to be part of this community. There's an expectation that, because you grew up in Galway, I went to this school, your kids will go to that school, and so on and so forth. We'll go to that bar and all of that. And that conformity is quite powerful. And thus, it's very easy to criticize someone who doesn't fit within that circle of what everyone else thinks is normal. So I don't think it's fair to criticize any entrepreneur, but what I would say is trying to define what problem you're trying to fix, even if it's slightly off what the real problem is. It's really hard to get to that point, and in a bunch of the businesses there's a bunch of businesses that I'm running now that have, really good revenue, but we still have not identified the true problem statement. There's a business that I founded last year that has millions in turnover today, but we haven't defined what the problem statement is yet. We have an idea what it is, but if I to actually say it to you, it still isn't exactly the problem statement.
You wouldn't,
and I think getting to that problem statement
here. We just wouldn't accept you into our accelerator here as part of the.
I'd happily. I would learn it. I would learn it a lot, I promise.
We would grill you on where's your problem statement, Paul? But speaking of which, I mean, it is good to see the NDRC program now with Dogpatch Labs, ourselves, Portershed, and a few others.
And I saw some of the mentors you have are like, you've some incredible people there that I think it's going to really add value to the entrepreneurs in Ireland. So, and I think this time it'll be run right. So that's a good thing.
We better edit out that bit just in case there's a legal challenge. Anyway, some of that, I mean, that business that you're in, do you want to speak to the nature of some of those businesses, just to show the diversity of thought and how open you are to opportunities?
So the last business I ran in the Middle East was, we owned and operated the largest online supermarket in the Middle East. We raised $14 million into that seed money, and we did the entire thing from logistics, technology, supply chain of an online grocery. And the other arm of that business was a digital transformation business where we would go into large corporates and we would innovate within them. And we won the Procter & Gamble global technology contract. So we powered P&G globally in all their consumer tech, because P&G had a problem, and we had the say fast approach to potentially support them on that vision. And one of the exciting areas is that there's a huge amount of technical debt in the world. And what I mean by technical debt is that companies that build over time build systems, processes, and resources against that to serve that piece of technology architecture that they have. And over time, you have to hire more people and more process, and then more layers and all of that. And it's going into big companies to re-architect technology for the future, is one of the verticals I'm playing in now. And it's really interesting, actually, because it's a lot of fun to bring efficiencies to our organizations, to turn technology, unfortunately, in a lot of big companies is a major disabler or product. And the things we want to try and create is that product is an enabler. And that's quite an exciting play to be in, because you see the excitement in large scale organizations as they're allowed to then innovate on top of product, while before they were stuck within an efficient product.
And the legacy tech, I know from working in the banking industry myself, I think Jamie Dimon was saying there recently that, incumbents should be scared shitless of fintechs coming to get them. And is part of that fear in terms of what challengers will bring to incumbents in all these retail places, that really driving this shift and this willingness to change?
Well, I think if you look at what's happened with COVID, right, across the global spectrum in every single industry, simple example is that you wanted to get something attested, you'd have to go to a law firm, they'd have to physically meet you, get your passport and attest that Paul's Paul and I will stamp this document. So from the simplest industry to the biggest industry, everything is going to be upended now, and I think that's a very unique time. And look how COVID is changing the way, the perception on how people would work or engage with governments, how they would work and engage with banks. I may never see my bank manager. Actually, why do I need to see my bank manager? Why do I even need to meet my lawyer? Does my lawyer need to even be in Ireland or New Zealand? And it's all the legislation of controls that have been put in over the years, which has created layers of inefficiency where people have been able to monetize those layers just because they sat in the middle. That's going to be completely changed. And I think that's the real opportunity with COVID, is that I think the resources that have been built, or the resource strategy by countries to put people in positions, that's going to dramatically change. And I think if you can understand that's the play to make, I feel, because it's never going to go back. It's never going to go back to pre-COVID. It's just going to be what the future is. And it's not living with COVID. It's just that every industry is up for grabs.
Nice. Better get through some rapid fire questions here. I'll go.
Yeah.
Colin French is wondering, what would you say your core skills are?
Oh God, I don't know. You'd want to ask some people I work with.
Well, maybe I would think that you think global, your refusal to be limited in the areas that you're going through, relentless focus.
I enjoy competition. I love competition. I love the ability to create something out of nothing. And I really like building relationships with people. So, irrespective, the one thing I learned, for example, in the Middle East is, in our office when we began Cobone, there was 26 different nationalities in my office when I was 25, multiple religions, and massive macroeconomic challenges to deal with around that. And the ability to connect with an individual, no matter where they're from, what their upbringing was, what their religion was, I think was one of the big things I learned, because that constraint that people place on things is huge. And there's still this subculture of, because this person's from there, or skin color, or whatever it might be, it's a massive limitation. That's probably one of the big things I've learned, is to be able to connect with people, no matter, I wouldn't even care where they came from, or if they went to university, or that wasn't, it was primarily adaptability, ambition, do they want to learn? And that was key for me. Everything else was secondary.
That's great. John Breslin says it's 7 years since you were chatting in the college bar, not
That's crazy.
drinking, but just giving a talk, and 6 years since you were touring startup hubs in Tokyo. He's wondering, advice for Irish startups looking to grow, go global: start local and grow, or go global from the start?
So I was asked this question. So I had a meeting with Enda Kenny in Dubai when he was Prime Minister, or Taoiseach, and I put it on Twitter, what question do you want me to ask him? And the question was, at the time, why is there such a high capital gains tax for entrepreneurs when there was no capital gains tax for property developers? And to answer that question is, it could be high thinking to be worrying about tax. And particularly, I can comment because it's that I was in an environment where there was no tax, which is a complete anomaly. But there's a lot of economies out there that have much more efficient tax structures, particularly for entrepreneurs, than Ireland. So my honest suggestion is to consider that when incorporating your company. And I know that's against everything that this would likely be, but it's quite inhibitive to incorporate in Ireland at the moment for an entrepreneur. And I know people talk about it, but it really is. So as an Irish company, I'd be considering on how you incorporate your company, because later it will be a problem statement for you.
And I think it's important the work that Scale Ireland and others are doing in terms of asking for the reform of the EIIS investment scheme to incentivize. That's super important. And until we actually say this type of thing, and people actually vote with their feet and go and do it elsewhere, we probably won't get that change. And we've got a very limited lobby power in terms of the startup ecosystem. I mean, I was doing some work with a Scale Ireland last year. I mean, the vintners were established in like in the 1700s. The farmers established their union in the 1950s. We've got one kind of just together now with Scale Ireland just recently, and lobbies actually work in terms of changing environments, and so it's interesting that you say that.
No, and you see some people on Twitter speaking openly now against the government. It's entertaining to watch, but the unfortunate reality, it's true. It's actually true, and it as an Irish person abroad, it can hurt to see what's happening there. So I'm just glad that comment of going to a restaurant and saying to your friends after that it was a terrible meal is actually being publicly spoken about now. So I just think Ireland's going to go through a lot of change in the coming years, and it's going to be a good thing.
Well, I think
I'm quite excited for that.
You might be speaking of our ticket tout in chief, who calls himself that, Paddy Cosgrave. Speaking out in that, and while everything and is not. Some things are challenging in terms of the way he addresses things. A lot of the stuff he's saying is actually true. Whatever about his methods, and we need that type of dialogue to question things now, or else it always stays the same and would be, it's crazy. I think the Jane Hogan. I think Jane is related to you, is she?
Hey, Jane.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Hogan, should I say? We need to be giving people their proper titles because they've worked hard for it. Jane is wondering, into any other research kind of metrics you look at before getting into it? Getting into a new business?
Many of the businesses I do are online, but not all. Actually, the majority I do now are completely offline. But the way I validate a business is, so say I want to launch a pizza company, and or whatever the concept is, I would create a beautiful brand, buy a domain name, set up landing pages, and I would spend a bit of money on putting traffic to that website to validate if there's interest in it. So what I would find interest is that if 100 people visited the site and I had a sign up now thing, so it looks like a real company and all of that, and if one person out of the 100 actually gave me their email address, I have a business. Now I may not have exactly the bells and whistles that go along with that business, but I have validated the business. And the other way I kind of validate it is I just speak to a lot of people. So, and that goes down to the thing of being with complete intent. So I would go out to the market and speak to people and pretty much ask, would you buy this? Because by validating a transaction early in the process of building or a registration or whatever the definition of success is, it can actually really help fast track that path. So I'm constantly looking for validation on that journey, rather than spending 6 months conceptualizing and building and then going to the market and realize you spent 6 months building something nobody wanted. So that's kind of my approach to business, is how quickly can I get revenue, and can I get it within 60 days?
I wish I'd actually told you that Maurice O'Gorman, our friend and chair of the Portershed, had started a business that we worked on last year called Validator, which is designed to help people validate their businesses before they start, which is one of the big challenges we have here in Ireland, is that while we have great entrepreneurs, we don't have the skills or the paradigm of looking at the business to make a decision as to whether you should go for it or double down on that or really devote your life for
Yeah.
it. And one of the things that I usually say, I still say it, but I used to say it when I was Yoga Dave, going in, doing a yoga session in startup weekends and stuff like that, is that entrepreneurship is hazardous for your health, your relationships, and
Yeah.
usually your finances. And the more you can do in terms of pain management, in terms of reducing the potential downside of your time and all of that is better. So is going to be good. So validation early and often, and continuous,
Yeah.
I
As
suppose.
quick as you can, and be willing to turn it off.
That's interesting.
And yeah, and I think you see commentary now of people, people who have made it, in inverted commas, telling people who are starting to follow what you're passionate about.
Oh,
And there's all this, and it's such bullshit. You gotta do whatever you gotta do to make it work, even
yeah.
if you don't like it. And even if you're in a job that you love, I promise you 90% of it you'll hate. The grass is never greener on the other side. It just, everything is always harder or bigger or more challenging, no matter what it is. So I just find, some of those speeches where people are like, oh, you got to follow your passion. Well, I don't even know what I'm passionate about. So how would I know what I'm supposed to follow? I think the biggest learning is you just got to go work in as many jobs as you can to learn what you don't like,
Yeah. I think
not what you like.
I don't know if you've listened
And if you'd
to
ask me what my passion is now, I have no idea what I'm passionate about, so I'm just still figuring that part out.
the Professor Galloway. I don't know if you ever listened to that Pivot podcast that he goes on. He goes, if anybody is telling you to follow their passion, those people are already a millionaire.
Yeah.
And it's usually the way, exactly as you say, that they're already success. There's still some questions coming in. I know we're getting to the bottom of our time here. We've got overnight success, John Brosnan. Who's not an overnight success at all. He's somebody who works super hard to do a great business. He's wondering, one of the original founders of Startup Galway, wondering, do you still follow the Rockefeller habits?
Yeah. 100%. So Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, Scaling Up 2.0 by Vern Harnish. It's a methodology I use, and primarily around the meeting schedule. It's so powerful. I mean, it's a really good book. So 100%, that's what I follow. And there's different versions of it, so whatever suits your business, but just implementing that, you would have quite a dramatic effect on your outcome.
Interesting. Speaking of John, I mean, the resilience. What about resilience? I mean, John epitomized resilience for me, for just like keeping going and like really committing to fully to this. What about that in terms of entrepreneurship?
I think take feedback from people, but you got to go with what matters to you. Because when I started, if I go back to the example of being in Ireland and everyone going to the same school and the same workplace and all of that, and you become the odd one out, if you're listening to that group, you'll never do anything. If you're taking feedback from that group, you just won't do it. And to understand that resilience comes from going completely against the norm. And like one of my mentors, which sticks with me today, he says, if everyone is going left, always go right. I remember when I was in Ireland, everyone in Ireland was going to Australia. Like, why would you go to where every other Irish person is? What's the strategy of that? What's the benefit of that? Go where nobody is, because that'll be your competitive advantage. And like when I moved to Dubai, when I left, I think there was 5,000 Irish people in the UAE, but there was only maybe 1,000 when I was there. So, you were the odd one out among a population of 10 million. So go where you have some unique competitive advantage. And I think resilience is to understand that every step you make, you're going to be going against what the crowd tells you, and to be comfortable with that.
That's interesting. Liam, who I know, Liam Pingree, really bright NUIG Galway graduate as well, who's looking at getting his own business. I know he did some work with HSBC, I think it was in New York originally, looking to get into his own business. But he's wondering, how did you get a team to believe that you were the right person to start your company and to go with you on that journey?
Yeah, tough one. You know, if you look around your circle around you, um, it's it's interesting when you see someone who gets really excited or energetic about something, how attractive that can be, or how influential that can be. And
Mhm.
again, it goes to the fear of putting your head out and actually saying, I'm going to do something.
Mhm.
But you'd be surprised by just putting your foot forward and saying, you know what, I don't really give a crap about what people are going to say. And that's very hard to deal with.
Mhm. Mhm.
But people will follow. And, you create so many limitations in your own mind. You just got to kind of do it. I don't know. I know there's no real magic formula here, but people will follow.
Mhm.
Not many people go out and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it on a public stage where it can completely go ass ways. And I'm going to give it a go.
Mhm.
And that's attractive to a lot of people. And that's attractive to people who are in big corporates who get paid a lot of money because they can't do that.
Mhm.
And they would actually work for you. I mean, I was 25 and I had people who were 40 working for me. I didn't even know how to manage them, you know?
Mhm.
So it's just interesting. People will always follow.
Yeah. And I think it's to your point about conviction and putting out that energy that you are relentlessly committed to this and that you're going to
Yeah,
make
no
a
matter
success
what.
of it. And it's amazing how much some of the things that you've said, like having from what I've seen of successful entrepreneurs and being lucky to see a few and know quite a few, and um, you know, the way that conviction compounds and kind of brings good things to you, and
Yeah,
the way that manners actually, and that what you spoke to about talking to anyone, and getting to know them, the way that respect that you can bring to people really compounds is something that I think is vastly underrated.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
also lets you get to know people, right? Because then you get to know what people's real values are, like you spoke earlier, and and that stands to you as well in other areas.
yeah. No, 100%, 100% agree.
I think the what about
You
luck?
can ask any questions. I don't mind. Um,
Make your own
so
make your own luck or not?
when you put the energy out there, luck comes to you. When you put your head out there, things come to you. If you're sitting waiting, the reality is most people will sit and wait for that promotion or that pay rise.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, they're in no control of their own destiny, although they think they're in control, but they're actually not. Um, but when you put your head out there, luck happens. Now, of course, there's market conditions that help. You look at COVID would have played into the favor of big companies. Is that luck or is that they were already positioned to take it?
Mm-hmm.
So I think by putting your head out there, luck happens. And to go to your point is, I try and wake up every single day, which is a good and a bad thing, to be better than yesterday across whatever it is I'm doing. Now, the problem is that means I need to reinvent myself every day. And if yesterday was a really good day, how could I even be better than that? But the compounding of the smallest action over time, you wouldn't believe the impact it has. It's astronomical. And I can just say that now, over 13 years of waking up every day and trying to do something, I could say that now. But when I started, I wouldn't have believed that.
Mm-hmm. And tell me, what would you like to see happening in terms of, you know, we see Stripe supporting UL with a really good computer science, kind of more or less an internship after that. And, you know, I know both of us as NUIG alumni, and that what would you like to see taught or done differently that could have stood to
Yeah.
you?
Now things have changed a lot, so
Mm,
I can't talk of what the current state is. I mean, I think I
mm,
was on the radio several years ago, which caused a bit of controversy, and I said it's better to do 8 internships than do any undergrad degree in Ireland,
mhm,
um, because there was no practical thing in the universities. And I don't know if it's changed, but the challenge I have with the university programs is that it's all theory taught by people who have no practical experience.
mm,
So what output do you expect of that? So I know masters, they go into more practical piece, but the more practical I wish in the Bachelor of Business I did in NUIG, they got you up to do public speaking all the time.
Mm.
When I went to university, I did a Bachelor of Business NUIG. I didn't know how to incorporate a business.
Yeah.
I didn't understand tax, fundamental basics of business. Now, I don't know if that's changed or not, but I think that there's too much of a focus on theory and not enough on actually, if I leave today, do I have the skills that I could actually start a business? And I doubt if a Bachelor of Business in any university in Ireland do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I know it's a high
something.
expectation within 3 years to do it, but I just think there's
Yeah.
too much theory and not enough actual action.
Well, I think, you learn about different theory and certain accountancy, which is a good basis for throwing you into KPMG as an intern to be a tax or whatever, and you might learn doing stuff there. But I mean,
Yeah.
I know that it's kind of usually taught in fourth year, the some aspect of the lean startup as a paradigm at looking at a business. And I'm not saying it's the best framework ever. I just devoted a few years of my life to it, but it's a fucking framework, that you look at a business and decide whether you go ahead, whereas you don't come out with those skills that allow you to assess things. But I think, as Jane is saying here, education combined with experience is golden. And I've found that, that some of the best people, one person who I was mentoring in the Lean Startup program in NUIG, I ended up asking her to come and work with me, and she did that instead of a master's. And she was just so capable at doing things. And she had worked in healthcare, in a restaurant business before that, and she was used to dealing with customers and talking to people. Phenomenal executive now in multiple spaces. So she is, but it's just that ability to connect with people and talk is it's
very powerful.
It is.
And
it is.
In Ireland, when I was growing up, there's some people naturally have it. So in school, I was incredibly shy.
Mm-hmm.
If a teacher asked me a question, I was scared to even answer the question. And, my family and Jane will recognize this on this call, but you realize how much of a limiter that is, and a huge part of Irish culture is not to put your head out because you can't, or don't be doing that. You can't, don't shame the family or something like that, So I just think that's a massive competitive advantage in Ireland. If you go against what people perceive to be normal.
Yeah.
Because their norm isn't actually what's normal.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, look, I think we're over time at the moment. I want to thank you for giving your time, sharing your insights and raw honesty there. I know we could go a lot deeper in certain areas, but I said, look, I'll try not to get you in trouble today, even though you were willing to speak controversially.
I don't mind. Don't worry.
I know you don't, but I'm like, okay.
I can see the questions and the comments about Ireland. So
yeah, we know that there's a lot of negativity out there at the moment in terms of, and we're getting that. And I think your type of positivity and putting out good energy and finding yourself with good people is something that we need to do, and we need to help each other. And if people want to follow what you're up to, what's the best way to do that? I know you're incredibly private, and I know this is the first kind of public speaking really you've done in about 2 years, I believe. So thank you for giving us your time. But if people want to follow your progress or that, is there any way?
I mean, I think I went from a stage where I was always associated with the company and would publicize that company to grow it. And the benefits of that were that people clearly had a reason to contact me or not contact me.
Yeah.
And now I'm enjoying people not knowing what I'm doing. It's almost building in, where I don't need to show what I'm doing. And then if it comes out later, great. But you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way, and I read every single email I get. So, and if I can help with anything, just feel free to reach out. I mean, there's one program which I resonated, which I think Ireland could benefit a lot and it's kind of what you're doing with NDRC is New Zealand, the government, they have a program similar to Enterprise Ireland called NZT. And they have a global program called Beachheads, which is they have incredible talent all over the world that are contracted by the government to support local companies. And that person could be based anywhere. And I think it's a massive competitive advantage New Zealand has. And if you look at the talent that Ireland has abroad, I mean, you have some of the most talented people in the whole world sitting in various parts of the world. And I think what NDRC are doing, and hopefully EI start to do stuff like that. You just have an incredible resource pool outside of Ireland to help. And like, if anything I can do to help you or Ireland or whatever that is, I'm happy to help.
Well, thanks.
Particularly Galway.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I think it's important for NDRC now that we've got an all Ireland approach with different hubs there, and there's going to be regional accelerators and that. So there probably has never been a better time to get the right support with really good structures in place in Ireland, and then to capitalize on that global network as well. So look, we'll see you back at the Connacht Tribune when we open it. You're welcome to join.
That'd be awesome.
I'm putting in a what's called, I tried to put in Dave's Champagne Lounge here at the Portershed, but they wouldn't let me. But seems like we're doing that now in the new building. So we'll have you back for that, and hopefully we'll have a rooftop barbecue and founders discussion in overlooking Galway Bay at some time soon.
That'd be awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Portershed, for organizing it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you indeed. You're a star. Cheers, buddy.
Cool. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.